So Dalton, you get to be one of my first guests on this whole idea of having some conversations and this podcast format. And so I've been excited about this for a long time. And I know we met a few years ago, and I've watched you as you were young in high school as a wrestler, and then we got to meet and have some much deeper conversations. And even though wrestling was part of it, it clearly wasn't the only thing that was going on. So, but this particular conversations that we're doing in these podcasts is really about the idea of transformation and how people change in their life and how they are able to taking away from Ryan Holiday's idea of how the obstacles in their life actually are the opportunities that they take. But before we jump into any of that, I'm just curious, what do you do? I mean, outside of wrestling and taking care of yourself, health and training and stuff like what do you do for fun? Any hobbies, any interests?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to helping you and finding a way to get these types of conversations out, because I think they were extremely beneficial to me when we started talking, and so I'm glad to be here for this. What do I do for fun? I'm really I guess I have a lot of different hobbies, but I'm into entrepreneurship and business and strategy within business, and I find all sorts of excitement in thinking about the world culturally, and basically all human behavior is fascinating to me in whatever realm it is, whether it's in business, whether it's in culture, communities, how we live and how we think. I think that's pretty much where my energy goes. No matter what I'm doing, I'm focused on why people do things the way that they do them.
Sure.
And trying to figure out how you can get through to people to change their behaviors and so on. Yeah.
Sure.
So,
Okay.
But I play golf once in a while, but I don't get out too much because of time restrictions. But
sure. Yeah.
Besides that,
well, I think just that, and that's another thing. I mean, when you said that, I'm like, that's totally makes sense from what I know of you, but I wouldn't have necessarily thought that was, what you would consider just doing fun. But I think it also is that element that I'm most interested, like getting to know you, and as I've gotten to know you, that you're much more than just that one-dimensional, athlete turned coach, and then that there's more to, and there's more that you have to offer, more that you are interested in than just the sport of wrestling, and that lifestyle. So, well, why don't we jump into that a little bit? So you used to be a high school state qualifier. That's when I first saw you down at the state tournament, and then you wrestled in college. So tell me a little bit, how did you get into wrestling? How did that all begin?
I started wrestling when I was like 5 years old because my older brother had wrestled, and I guess my parents just decided to bring me along. I actually didn't start off on a positive note. I lost my first match, which kind of it was traumatic for me, but it was little kids wrestling, so there was no beauty to the skills that we possessed. But I lost, and I didn't like the feeling of losing, so I quit right there. And I didn't fully quit the sport of wrestling. I just quit competing. I didn't like the feeling of competing, and for some reason, even at a young age, I felt unprepared, and that bothered me. I felt like I wasn't prepared to compete, so I decided to go, I'm not going to compete. Took a few years. I practiced every day. Started competing a few years after that. I think I was like a 500 wrestler my first year back, and then I had...
And when was that? When
probably 7, I think I started wrestling again. I think I had a losing record when I was 7, and then 8, I went to 500. 9, I had a winning record, and then 10... onward, I was a state placer. And I placed in the state tournament 4 years in kids club and 4 years in high school. Went on to the University of Illinois. At the college level, it was really difficult for me because I didn't I didn't possess the same motivations that I had when I was younger.
Okay.
When I was younger, I was extremely motivated to win a state championship.
Okay.
And so I was, dedicated because of that.
Yeah.
When I went to college, it was a little bit, I had some darker moments because I didn't know necessarily why I was going to college. I didn't know what I wanted to do. People would tell you that you're there for education and opportunity, but then, wrestling was a job at the Division I level. So, if you're not doing well, you're not received well. So it was pretty difficult for me there and in my early years, but yeah.
So, well, one question I had, going back, so, you started young, 5 years old, right? And so, usually, right, when I look at it, is they're either wrestling families or there's some other, older person or, brother, uncle, dad, who got you started with it? How did that all happen, and what kind of influence was that, and what was that like when you, after that first match, said,
Yeah. There was really zero pressure from my family.
Okay.
I never expressed that I didn't want to do it.
Yeah.
I liked being around the wrestling practices and stuff like that. And from a very early age, I think I was just always competitive with myself.
Okay.
So, my motivation for the sport grew as I got older, but it most certainly is tied to the idea that whatever I do, I'm trying to figure it out.
Right.
So, I don't know whether all of it was just influence or it was something that, from an early age, I just focused on whatever I was doing. I was trying to figure out how to be really good at it.
Sure.
I know that growing up, I can remember my dad talking all the time about you can be the best. Like you can be as good as anybody. There's nobody that has abilities that you can't possess.
Right.
So I remember there was a lot of encouragement with pursuing your potential, but it was never related to the sport of wrestling.
Okay, gotcha. So then going back to Champaign, when you wrestled for U of I, you were there for how long? How long did you wrestle for them?
3 years total.
Okay.
My first year I was there for a half a year.
Okay.
And I decided that it wasn't for me at the time, and I actually came home.
Okay.
And I was really in a place where I just didn't know if I wanted to be in college, and I didn't know if I wanted to be in college wrestling.
Sure. Yeah.
So I actually came home halfway through the year. Came home, helped coach a little bit, but ultimately had a lot of encouragement, and then I missed wrestling, so I ended up going back for the next 2 years.
At Champaign?
At Champaign, and then my junior year I decided to transfer to the University of Nebraska.
Okay.
Again, this kind of gets into that idea of what I was looking for that transformation. So I thought that the University of Nebraska was going to provide me a better opportunity.
Okay.
I thought that it was going to be more enjoyable, more motivating, and so on.
Okay.
So I went to Nebraska for a year, and after that, I retired from Division I wrestling, came home for a year, coached, and went to school. And I had tons of encouragement to go back to university to get my degree.
Okay.
So then I went to Elmhurst College, where I wrestled and finished my degree in exercise science.
Okay. So then technically you wrestled, even though you were in the wrestling room, 2 years for Illinois, 1 year for Nebraska, and then you were finished up at Elmhurst.
Yep.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. What in those time periods, either high school or in college, at any one of those schools, was there someone, a coach or someone that kind of like stands out in your memory of like who had an influence on you? What was that like?
Yeah. Most definitely. We've talked about this a few times, but when I first went to the University of Illinois, my high school wrestling coach had gone to Illinois as well. And when I left, he said, Coach Heffernan is a great coach. Get close to him. He's a smart guy. He's got a lot to offer you. So when I first went down there, I naturally was drawn to Coach Heffernan. He's now the head wrestling coach at University of Illinois.
He was an assistant then, though, right?
He was an assistant at that point.
Okay.
So yeah, I asked him a lot of questions. I was around him. When I felt like it wasn't right for me, I went there. I went to him and talked to him about it. I was a freshman in college, and I was crying to him about being homesick and not wanting to be there. And then later on, when I got to Elmhurst, Steve Marinetti was another huge influence in not only my life, but the way I looked at wrestling and that sort of stuff. But I can definitely say Coach Heffernan, I gave Coach Heffernan every opportunity to not have a continued relationship with me to this day. And looking back, he was just always there. He was never there only on the circumstances if I could help him in a wrestling world.
Sure.
He was always there, and still is if I have any questions or advice, and he's got it.
Interesting. So, and I think you made a good point, and I think that's so many times, been in the counseling world, for 28 years or whatever, that so many times when it's a lot of pressure to go from high school to college and going away to school, and then even more so when all these expectations and all these unknowns and all these things are going on to start playing or competing at regardless if it's D3 or D1 or NAIA, doesn't really matter. I think there's just so many times I talk to young people that they are 100% sure they know what they want to do in the spring of their senior year, and then come that fall of their freshman year, it's like, this is a whole different world. And I know that was my experience when I left Rock Valley and went to Illinois State. I had competed, and I had already won the national title and state title, but that was a completely different experience being down at Illinois State for the first time away, and it was just different. I don't know how to.
Yeah. Well, I talk about the thing that I hope to figure out a way to impact or change at the higher levels is when you go to the Division I level in sports, or just in the college level in general, it no longer becomes about your journey. And this is something that, again, I'm constantly trying to figure out the best way to explain and articulate this. But when you go to college, you have a handful of coaches that their careers and livelihood depend on the performance of the team. And for me in wrestling, my entire experience with wrestling up until that point was just about me.
Right. If
I didn't want to train, nobody gave me a hard time. If I did want to train, I didn't need anybody to tell me a good job. It was an individual journey and an individual experience. And then when you get to college, it becomes this thing that's attached to so many other people's experiences.
Sure.
And I think it takes a different form. I no longer think that it's a personal experience. It becomes dependent on, your experience influences others depending on what role they're in.
Right.
And for me, I struggled with that because, as a coach, I look at athletes and maybe they're not there yet. And this goes back to how Heffernan always approached it, and that's why I think he's a great coach, is he never approached it like it was only one. I guess he was confident that no matter what happened, he was going to be fine. So he never projected his insecurities of losing his job or losing a team tournament or something like that. He was always focused on the individualized approach to coaching, and I think that's an important aspect. But it's just hard when it becomes other people's journey.
Well, it's interesting. This is what came to mind when you were just talking about this idea of other people's expectations of the outcome, and then they are somehow tied into that outcome. Like you said, either having an individual national champion or ranking higher, or winning the conference or whatever it may be, and that idea of your individual performance and the outcome of that then being directly tied to their perceived outcome versus the journey and developing along in the journey. I don't remember who did this, who quoted this or whatever, but he talked about the idea of it was a collegiate wrestler coach, and the guy was really super excited about that he just won and was going all crazy about that, and coach walked over to him and said, "This is the first time you've ever won? It won't be the last time. So what are you getting so excited about?" And later, another guy on the team lost, and he was all upset and stuff. And coach walked over and said the same thing to him, that it wasn't going to be the last time he wrestles. It wasn't going to be the last time he was going to lose. Why is he taking it? It was much more about that journey than it was about that one specific outcome. And I know for me, as well as some other athletes, or not even athletes, just individuals in general, of how much more anxiety, how much more stress that we put on ourselves if we think what has to happen a certain way. And I know for me, I would love to say that I'm completely beyond that or transcended that yet. I'm not. I'm reminded of it when I beat myself up too much about a particular whatever it is. I can come back around a little bit faster now than I was, 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But I can still get triggered, still get hooked. So.
Yeah. Well, just the idea that Ryan Holiday, the obstacle is the way, but more so the influence of Stoic philosophy has helped me more than anything transition into coaching, knowing that I've already done all of this stuff.
Yeah.
And trying really hard to separate myself and going back to the journey of like encouraging people to take that journey.
Yeah.
And holding space for them when they have those moments to talk them through. Like you said, This won't be the last time you win. Yeah. This won't be the last time you lose. And it's a consistent pursuit of personal growth and expansion, I guess.
I know a few years ago when we first met, and I don't remember which conversation it was, but we talked about that idea of being here, introducing the idea of the hero's journey. And so tell me a little bit about that. What was that when I first introduced that concept to you of Campbell's work? What was that like? And I remember you talked about that being a pretty profound. And so tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Well, when you first exposed me to the movie, it was the movie. Now, up until that point, it's actually fascinating because I was always fascinated with the afterlife, religion, and just things that maybe frustrated me, maybe didn't make a lot of sense to me. Again, going back to the human behavior, like certain things didn't sit well with me. So every year of college, I took a theology class, but I never came across anything about Joseph Campbell's work. So I never knew who he was beforehand, and you showed me a video, and it was called Finding Joe, and then talked about the hero's journey of going into going into the woods without any path, and if you found a path, right there that it's not the path for you. And then just this idea of trials and tribulations that create I want to say stronger, but you only become more aware of your strength already, right? Mm-hmm. So the Buddhist story about they had a gold statue and they covered it up, and then later so nobody would steal it, and then later they found out that it was gold. But when I watched that movie and I had the context of what he was trying to do and bring the hero's journey story to light and explain that this is, a great way to explain the human experience. For me, it embodied identically the experience of a wrestler becoming the best wrestler that he can become. Mm-hmm. Because if you want to become really good at wrestling, it is extremely difficult. There's not a ton of other people that want to do it, so you're often alone in very important developmental times. Mm-hmm. Looking back, there was a lot of times where I'm training by myself, so like the story of the hero's journey for me was just it was something that I was looking for so that I could find a way to explain to other parents and coaches, like, hey, this is the hero's journey for individuals. Mm-hmm. So stay out of it. Yeah. Right? Like, parents obviously are trying to do the best that they can for their kids, and oftentimes they get in the way and they don't allow their kid to experience their own journey because they're afraid. Yeah. And going back to the hero's journey, like, you're by yourself. Mm-hmm. You're on your own path. You're not on the path that other people want you to be on. Right. And it's not a safe path. Right. There's going to be a lot of dark, down moments, but the only thing that you can do is remind them that they're strong enough to get through it and that they'll learn from it,
Well, I think that idea, and we talk about it, of helicopter parents, right? Regardless of, and I think in wrestling, no different than any other sport, especially at the lower levels, there's so much projection based upon the parent. Could be projecting onto their, son or daughter who's wrestling and about that particular outcome that they have versus the development. I know when I was coaching at Harlem that I would see kids that were going through all the camps and all the different kids clubs and all the things, and then by the time they got sophomore, junior in high school, wrestling varsity, they were done. They didn't want to wrestle anymore, and they weren't wrestling for them anymore. They weren't playing football for them anymore, or basketball, whatever the sport was. And I think you're right about that. You said that piece about it not being safe. And I think sometimes when people are not fully understanding, we're not necessarily talking about physical safety, but more importantly, that emotional, safety. Like when you left, to go down to Champaign, that was part of it. That was part of your journey. It wasn't safe. It was, you were out of your comfort zone. You were questioning not just wrestling, but you were questioning, do I even want to be in college? Is this really for me? What's the point now? All those things. And it's those moments. I know for me, Campbell's work, at first when it was introduced to me, I was attracted to it, but it was so complex yet simple that I couldn't get my head wrapped around it, but I kept going back to it. And then it was I had different people teaching me about it and walking me through. And I remember the greatest, and this was probably about the time that I first introduced it to you. I was in the middle of doing something I had never done before, which was took a 6-month sabbatical from counseling at that time, which led me to be available to meet then. But I kept going back to that film to remind me that where I was at and the fears that I had financially, business-wise, all those things, that it was okay. It was okay to be afraid as long as I'm continuing to question, what is it that I'm really afraid of? What really was the demon or dragon or whatever that was? And I think making that, because I think of like either performing arts, which my daughter does, so I'm heavily influenced with the performing arts, but then also sport, I think it's more of a metaphor for life. It's a playground for us to test those things. Let me transition a little bit for a sec. You had an opportunity now to no longer be yourself competing, but now an opportunity coaching and being a head coach. And is this the first time a head coach?
No, second.
Okay. And what was the first head coaching position?
I was coaching at Rockford Boylan for 1 year.
Okay. And now you're going to be the head coach of a new project, right? A new initiative. So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm the head coach of the Belvedere High School Co-op. So due to lack of involvement at one of the schools, they decided to co-op the two Belvedere high schools into one program.
Okay.
So this is the first year. I was an assistant last year, and it's obviously a unique opportunity because it's my alma mater. It's my home. It's where my family is, where I grew up, I think, to be honest, bringing back Joseph Campbell's work, it's the return aspect.
Yeah.
Joseph Campbell's work is initiation. I don't know how I forget what the second word.
First is the call, then the initiation, and then the return home.
Okay, then the return home, and basically you go out into the world, you learn all these things about yourself and about the world, and then you bring them back to the community that you're from to show them what you've learned and what actually exists out there.
Yeah.
And in our community or communities around here, we are confined oftentimes to the things that we know and what we've known to be true around here. Wrestling for me has allowed me to go in circles that I could have never imagined going into. I've been around coaches that have had just so much success from a athletic side, as a mentoring side. I've been around professional athletes in worlds that a small town kid, from Belvedere, from two middle class working parents, could never imagine. And the idea of showing people what's possible through sport, from a journey standpoint, the journey is so beautiful. If you become your best self, if you reach your potential in anything, the journey that opens you in, the journey that presents itself is so awesome and educational, and I think so I'm excited to kind of find a way to, one, show people systems that I've learned that contribute to a successful program, organization. I want to bring back the experience that what opportunities lie for themselves if they try, and then obviously hopefully leaving an impact, a motivation and inspiration to young people to live a certain way, to really try to become their best selves and continue to grow. So it's an exciting opportunity.
I think about that idea that obviously when we're competing, especially as competitive as you and I are, a state title, bringing back a state title to Belvedere, or bringing back a national title, or whatever, is in concept it seems so important, but I think what Belvedere is going to benefit greatly, and the students, the athletes, and the parents are going to benefit even more so than those titles, is that you're bringing back the journey. You're bringing back the framework of that journey, and that, for me, as an outsider and someone who's become a fan of you, not just on the mat, but I'm excited about seeing that, and seeing that what you're going to be able to bring, not just the mechanics of wrestling, because I know you'll be able to teach them that as well, but even more so how to help these young boys, and maybe some young girls, I don't know, how to develop into the best that they could possibly be, develop into men, develop into women, to the best they can be. So Dalton, I want to thank you very much for coming on board. Would you be open to coming back again as this begins? Because it's a couple of weeks you guys are starting wrestling, right?
Yeah, it starts next week.
Oh, geez. All right. So it's perfect that I got you before the season season,
Yeah.
and then we can maybe touch base as the season's unfolding or the season ends. All right, Dalton. Thanks
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing how many podcasts you do and
All right.
the next guest.
Perfect. All right. Thanks.
Thank you.